Peace. This your host, Selah, Shalom. And the topic of discussion today is called the time of Ajah, the time of fallen angels, warfare, and false gods. Now, to better explain the time period of Ajah, we have to first understand the arc cycles of 3,000 years and the behavior of mortals and angels during an arc cycle of 3,000 years. As stated in the book of Cosmogony and Prophecy, chapter 7, verse 5 through 8, it states, verse 5, "At certain periods of time, for hundreds of years, nations have dwelt in peace and have risen in virtue, then turn to war within themselves and go down in death." Verse 6. The prophets of old divided time into cycles of 3,000 years with slight variations, and they found that at such periods of time, some certain impulse came upon the people, causing them to try to be better and wiser, even as the same feeling is this day, manifesting itself in many nations. Verse 7. The scale then riseth 400 years, more or less, and after that, wars and epidemic come upon the people. They begin then to decline, especially in virtue and peace. But the general intelligence suffereth little for about the next 600 or 700 years, after which time they destroy their libraries and records and reduce themselves to ignorance and vice. See that? Then follows darkness of 1,000 or more years, with slight intermissions. In other 600 years, the corporeal senses begin to ascend. Self-conceit come upon them. They think they're at the beginning of wisdom on earth. They cometh to another cycle of light. Angels descend from the unseen worlds. New revelations crop out in every quarter. Inspiration come upon mortals, and they go to the opposite extreme, superstition and obedience to unseen influence. Verse 8. Such then is the general character and behavior of man during a cycle. So this verse is just giving a synopsis of the behavior of mortals during an arc cycle of 3,000 years. So within the arc cycle, there are times of peace and there are times of falsehood and warfare. So now we're going to deal with the times of Ajah, which occurs within a subcycle of an arc cycle of 3,000 years, being the time of fallen angels, false gods, and warfare. Now, what is Ajah? In the book of Jehovah, chapter 2, verse 8, it states, "Atmospherian worlds I also created in the firmament, and I gave them places and orbits and courses for themselves. But atmospherian worlds I created shapeless and void of fixed forms, for they are in process of condensation or dissolution, being intermediate in condition between my ethereal and my corporeal worlds. Of 3 degrees of density created I them, and I commanded man to name them, and one he called Ajah, and one Jaya, and one Nebula." So Ajah, Jaya, and Nebula are basically atmospheric pressures and densities within regions of the firmament the earth passes through. And Ajah has a couple of other descriptions that will be described later. Now, in the book of Divinity, chapter 15, verse 9, it states, "With these possibilities created the Creator, the earth and the heavens above the earth. A time for the earth to give off its substance, the which flieth upwards into the atmosphere, hundreds of years, and a time for the earth to receive from the atmosphere, surcharged from the regions far away, an addition of substance for hundreds of years. And when it is thus receiving, it is called the time of Ajah, because that which falleth condenses is Ajah." So the same way water evaporates into the air for a period of time, then fall to earth as water, such is the case with Ajah, but on a greater scale. Now, before I go into detail about the times of Ajah, I want to first declare the labor of true God and his hosts during such times. So you could understand the difference of labor and behavior of true God compared to the false God during these times of Ajah. Now, in the book of Divinity, chapter 14, verse 1 through 3, it states, verse 1, Jehovah said, When Ajah cometh near, a dawn of Dan is the time of light, the beginning of an arc cycle. Let my Lu is our angels, masters of generations. Their whole duty is to prepare marriages and birthrights. Let my Lu is be swift in duty, far-seeing in the races of men. I not only break up the old foundations of temples and cities in those days, but the foundations of the abuse of the caste of men. My voice is upon the races of men. Today I say, preserve ye the caste of men, marry ye thus, and so on, everyone to their own line, for I perceive it is wisdom. Tomorrow I say, I will have no caste, for the races are becoming impoverished in blood. Marry here, marry there, and I give them Ajah, and their desires break all bounds, and I raise them up giants, strong limbs. So here Jehovah is describing his changes of times, weighing the options of mortals depending on their growth and population. So shall measures be made, nothing is set in stone. So understand this. Verse 2, But in those days my Lu'is, these are masters of generations, angels that have to do with the upbringing, the marriaging of offspring. That's their duty, to control the bloodline. Verse 2, But in those days my Lu'is shall fly swiftly and with great power, that a seed may be preserved unto me in my kingdoms. I come not for one race alone, but unto all men. As by my spirit created I them all alive, so is my hand over them all to eternity. See that? So here it's saying that in the time of Ajah, the seed will be preserved to raise up heirs to Jehovah by the guardian angels influencing the marriages. So here it's saying that in the time of Ajah, the seed will be preserved to raise up heirs to Jehovah. Because during the time of Ajah, a lot of iniquity and lawlessness and sin is going on, and raising up righteous mortals can be a challenge in such circumstances. Verse 3, And when the shower of Ajah is over and gone, I send my high-raised gods and goddesses to gather together my flocks and to proclaim unto them anew my wisdom and power. And those that have been selected and preserved by my Lu'is, masters of generations, angels that control the bloodline, are the foundations of my new order. See that? So here it's telling you that the conditions after the time of Ajah, because usually after the time of Ajah comes another sub-cycle or the beginning of an arc cycle, depending on where the earth is at in the position of the arc cycle. In the beginning of every arc cycle or sub-cycle, there is a time of light, called the time of Dan, where the high gods and goddesses establish new laws and new orders for mortal progression and clearing away falsehood at the same time. So this is just a quick synopsis of the labor and work of true God and his hosts during the time of Ajah within a sub-cycle of 3,000 years. I want to clear that up first so you won't get it confused about the genuine labor of true God and what their work is to do, while I'm about to now expose how these false gods operate during the same time period of Ajah. Now the verse I'm about to read is during the 17th arc cycle, called the Ark of Noah. It was at the beginning of this arc cycle that the sinking of the continent of Pan, formerly called the Flood or Dalug, took place. Now when we observe the arc cycle, where it states the Dark Ages, this is the sub-cycle of the time of Ajah, being 2,000 years after the flood, and roughly 24,000 years from our present time. Now you can get a sense of the time period we're dealing with and where we're at. Now, in the book of Aph, son of Jehovah, chapter 17, verse 7 through 11, it states, verse 7, And the next harvest of God and his lords was 200 million souls. Now, let me just break that down real quick. When it says, when the next harvest of God and his lords was 200 million souls, what they're saying is that at the beginning of every sub-cycle or arc cycle, God and his council, his lords, and the angels that he raised up from earth under his administration are taken up into the Etherian worlds at the harvest times. So the collected host and number was 200 million souls that's going to be going with true God that was sitting on the throne for that particular time. So when that harvest came, that was his ascension and his host along with him. So now again, verse 7. And the next harvest of God and his lords was 200 million souls. And after that, the earth passed into the Aja of Erkstan. These are regions within the firmament for 800 years. And the light of the upper heaven was lost to the earth and atmosphere. So there was no harvest for the Etherian realm. And because of the darkness in atmosphere, it began to fall in Haiti. And the 7 entities, or tetrads, took root in Horeb. Horeb is the name of the heavenly kingdom. And overspread the dominions of God and his lords. And many in heaven rose up and proclaimed themselves gods and lords, obtaining followers, some to an extent of 3 million souls. See that? So here is giving you a description of what takes place when the earth passes through regions of Asia. One of the first things it mentioned is that the upper heavens was lost to sight due to the darkness of Aja. In those regions in the firmament, the earth was passing through for a period of 800 years. Now, to put that in content, the same way it can be a clear sunny day for several hours, then clouds can come and overcast and block out the sun, dimming the daylight due to the cloud coverage. So is it with Aja when the earth is passing through its regions, just to give you some content. And this is the time angels fall from the ways of the Creator, proclaiming themselves as gods and lords. Now, when it mentioned the 7 entities, or tetrads, the explanation of that is in the Lord's first book, chapter 1, verse 68, where it states, verse 68, they shall remember the 7 tetrads, or 7 entities. The first, enticing evil. The second, the flesh evil. Third, the joking evil. Fourth, worthlessness. Fifth, vanity. Sixth, delight in destruction. And seventh, Satan, desire for leadership, which is the captain of death. So these are the 7 entities that took root in the souls of both mortals and angels during the time of Aja. Verse 8, and these false gods made slaves of their followers, exacting service in lieu, giving pitiful homes and regiment, and by the labor of their slaves embellished their mansions and cities in Haiti. See that? Sounds like slavery, as above so below. Verse 10, but during the last 1,000 years in atmosphere, there being no resurrection to Etheria, many fell into disbelief of the emancipated heavens, and so set about building up heavenly kingdoms of their own account, and for their own glory. And in order to have exalted kingdoms, they sent their slaves back to mortals to inspire them with the glory of their false God's kingdom, that others in turn might become slaves also. See that? Verse 11. So confusion began in heaven again, and they reacted on mortals through the angels present, and war and misery overspread the nations and tribes of men on earth. Thus ended the cycle of Aph, son of Jehovah, in the ark of Noah, which was 3,600 years. See the depths of what's going on here? How angels can influence mortals with their false propaganda, and mortals, humans, not knowing no better, accepting it, believing it, hook, line, and sinker. But notice they lost faith after 1,000 years due to Aja. They didn't believe in Etheria no more and set up heavenly kingdoms of their own. And they began a war among themselves, which is the general behavior of mortals and angels toward the last 1,000 years of an arc cycle of 3,000 years. As stated earlier in Cosmogony and Prophecy, chapter 7, verse 7, where it says, then followeth a darkness of 1,000 or more years with slight variations. See that? Now, another example of the time of Aja is during the 22nd arc cycle after the creation of mortals, called the Ark of Lu. Now, during the dawn of this arc cycle is when Zarathustra came and laid down the Almazdian law. So 200 years after the time of Zarathustra is where I'm reading from, being the first sub-cycle, being a period of 400 years, and this is the time of Jah. Now in the book of Divinity, chapter 9, verse 1 through 13, it states, verse 1, "Then God bewailed the state of the earth, because man ceased to love anything thereon. His whole mind and heart were set upon heavenly things, and the earth was becoming like a neglected farm, grown up with seeds and briars. So Jehovah answered God's prayer, saying, Behold, I will bring darkness around and about the earth on every side. See to it then, my son, for not only will man desire of the earth, but the angels in thy high heavenly places will forsake them and go down to the earth." See that? So when it states God bewailed because mortals' minds and hearts were upon heavenly things, this is due to the Zarathustrian law at the time the Zarathustrian priesthood was set up at the beginning of the arc cycle 200 years previous. But now a couple hundred years later, the earth is being neglected in the sense of lack of cultivating nature. That's why it gave content when it stated like a neglected farm grown up with seeds and bribes. Verse 2, "So it came to pass Jehovah brought Jah upon the earth, and it was in a state of darkness for 400 years. And the sun shone not, but was like a red ball of fire. And mortal beings were without lights and shadows." See that? So here it's telling you the condition of the earth during the time of Jah for 400 years. Just imagine you're used to seeing the yellow sun at high noon and a blue sky. Now imagine waking up one day and the sun is shining like a red ball of fire at high noon with the red atmosphere, and it remains like that for 400 years. Now imagine the children growing up in those generations of the sun in such conditions, not aware of the yellow sun and blue sky. See that? So OAHSPE is making you aware of these climatic changes that takes place during the time of Ajah and Jah within these subcycles of 400-year periods. Verse 3, "And men's mind and heart took after the nature of the corporeal world, losing sight of Ormazd, the Creator, and his heavenly promises. And they bethought them of the desires of earth and of the pleasures of flesh life. Now during Jah there fell perpetual atmospheric substance on the earth, and it was as of the nature and kind of substance of which the earth is made, but atmospheric. And this is that which is called Jah." Now notice that mortals are growing up in these conditions. Their focus is now more on corporality. And it also speaks of earth substance falling to the earth during these times, similar to how meteorites would fall to earth. And that which fall will create a devastating effect on the environment depending on the magnitude. It could create ash clouds due to the debris from the fallen substance, blocking out the sunlight for years, decades, and centuries. Now, verse 4, "And the plateaus of Harata and Zerro," these are heavenly plateaus in heaven, "were driven down to the earth and near the earth, and the belt of meteors was moved near by thousands of miles. And meteorite stones fell in many places upon the earth, like a rain shower, but burning hot, with suffocating smell. And the affairs of mortals were changed. They built new cities, and became great hunters, applying the wisdom of their forefathers to the matters of the earth." See that? Understand the condition the earth goes through and the changes of mortals during these earth changes. You have atmospheric plateaus descending and substance condensing, falling to earth. In such cases, meteorites. Now, even in the Bible, it speaks of fire and brimstone raining down from heaven. In Revelation verse 9 and 18, it states, "By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths," or out of the sky. Well, here is the real meaning behind such occurrences. So even the Bible, what they're referring to is the time of Ajah, the time of Jah, just to put things in perspective. So within 400 years, these things were going on. And as another precept, as far as a meteorite falling to the earth, in the book of Divinity, chapter 17, verse 2, it states, verse 2, in the last month of the last year of Ajah, even while God, Jehovah's Son, and his Lord gods, and his lords and sub-gods were proud of heart that they should carry the earth and her heavens through safely, they met sore trials. This then is what happened. A comet came within the earth's vortex and was drawn in, even as floating drift is drawn within a whirlpool in a river. Just to give you some content. The substance of the comet was condensed and fell on the earth in mist and dust and ashes. And the earth and the heavens above the earth were in darkness 12 days. And the darkness was so great that a man could not see his hand before him. See that? So this is just to show you some of the conditions that the earth been through in time past and time to come as well. Don't think these things cannot happen again, because we're in a new arc cycle of a period of 3,000 years. And 2048 will be the 200-year marker. So 2048, 2050, the next 400 years from that period could be a time of Jaya or Ajah, where Jehovah may start from 2050, sending down Ajah, meteorites, and change the atmosphere and nature of the earth. Now back to the book of Divinity, chapter 9, verse 5 through 13, verse 5. And the heavenly places of the light were broken up and descended to the earth, and the angels were cast upon the earth. Sounds familiar? Turning away from faith in Ormaz, the Creator, seeking joy in the affairs of earth. And God and his lords were powerless unto righteous works. Either were mortals or angels, but man and woman became prolific, and they grew large, full of resolution and power. Verse 6. The voice of Jehovah spoke to God, saying, Maintain thou thy kingdom, and thy gods and thy lords under thee shall also maintain their kingdom, nor suffer thy people to be discouraged with my works. So here the Creator is telling true God to basically maintain through the times of Ajah. It's like a hurricane hitting the city, and all the weight is on the mayor and his council to assist in the disaster. Some of the council may resign in such a time, while other council members are going to assist on plans, relief for the distressed victims until the mission is complete. Such is the challenges of true God and his heavenly kingdom in the times of Ajah. Verse 7. Because I have sent darkness upon the earth to benefit mortals in morality, so have I also given my heavenly host lessons in my spirit world. Nor shall they call this a judgment upon them, nor say I do these things in anger, nor as a punishment, nor for benefit of one to the injury of the other. See that? So the Creator is being just. This is a lesson for the whole. So here the Creator is explaining that these lessons are for both mortals and angels, learning how to overcome the elements of the lower heavens and earth. And notice the Creator stated, I do these things not in anger, not for punishment, nor for judgment. But the false gods, proclaiming to be the Creator, is an angry and jealous God. Understand the difference. Verse 8. Because though we're guided by my voice and my commandments in bestowing the divine law, behold, the strength and wisdom of thy pupils. For inasmuch as they learn to master the elements I created in atmospheria, so will they become triumphant in my Etherian worlds. See that? So the sore trials and labor that mortals and angels go through only makes them stronger in the end, and better equipped to deal with situations like that when they occur to others, because you've been through it, you know better how to manage the situation. Verse 9. God perceived, and he and his lords and sub-gods fortified their kingdoms on all hands, and provided assistance to their colleges, factories, hospitals, and places of education, in order to maintain the angels who sought resurrection. See that? Because many of these angels had fell off. They become fallen angels. And the whole thing is to graduate off the earth and its atmosphere into the Etherian world. So when it says sought to resurrection, it's referring to their resurrection off the earth and its atmosphere. Verse 10. Nevertheless, it came to pass, many angels believed in a new order of light was coming on the earth, wherein the earth would become the all highest abide for angels and gods. See that? kind of like the flat earthers, believing that the earth is the all-highest, you're trapped in a dome. These concepts come from times like this. Otherwise, having lived 200 or 300 years in atmospheria and never having been in Etheria, began to disbelieve in the higher heavens, and finally to disbelieve in Jehovah also. So again, at the time of Jaya or Aja, angels fall from their highest state and begin to disbelieve in the Creator and reaching the Etherian worlds, the higher heaven, while others maintain their position with true God and graduate and resurrect off the planet during the harvest times. See that? It's like classmates with high expectations to graduate, but after time begin to lose faith in graduating due to the difficulties and challenges and drop out of school. Such is the nature of the fallen angels during the time of Aja or Jaya. Verse 11. And then 200 years later, God and his lords lost influence and power with both angels and mortals, and the latter took to war, and the angels who had ministered unto them became wanderers and adventurers without organization, and cared neither for the truth nor wisdom, but flattered mortals for their own glory. Verse 12. And the kings and queens of the earth built temples for their familiar spirits, who had assumed the ancient names of gods and lords. See that? See the deception? So here 200 years more would be a total of 600 years, after which false gods and lords arise, followed by a period of warfare. See, these things have a way of playing out once you start to understand how prophecy works, or these subcycles works. They'll first leave true God's heavenly kingdom. Second, set up their own heavenly kingdom, proclaiming themselves as God. Third, they go to war among themselves for territory and dominion. Fourth, they're cast in hell, left in chaos. And then fifth, they're delivered and restored, only to start back where they left off before they did the dumb shit. Now another example of Aja, a little over 2,000 years later in the same arc cycle, there is another period of Aja as stated in the Book of Divinity, chapter 13, verse 16 through 18, where it states, verse 16, And in 11 days thereafter, behold, Aja began to fall on heaven and earth. The belt of meteorites gave up its stones, and showers of them rained down on the earth. And the sun became as a red ball of fire, and remained so for 166 years. And the peoples of Arabia, and Vindia, or Shem, and Japheth, Asia, China, fell from holiness. The Zarathustrians gave up celibacy by hundreds of thousands, and married and begot children in great numbers. Many women giving birth to 20, and some even to give and 20 children. And some men were the fathers of 70 children, and not a few even 100. And the Zarathustrians, even the faithists, with the mark of circumcision, went and married with the mongrels and with the drunks, so that the foundation of castes were broken up. So it describes how substance fell to the earth from the meteorite regions of atmospheria. Even earlier where it stated meteorite stones fell in many places upon the earth like a rain shower, but burning hot with suffocating smell. This is the same event taking place. And if substance of that nature fell to earth, it would have a huge effect on the environment. In this case, the sun becoming a red ball of fire and remaining so for 166 years. See that? Let that sink in. Verse 17. So great was the power of Aja that even the Ayans often broke their vows and lived clandestinely with the world's people, begetting offsprings in great numbers, not eligible to enter their sacred cities. And yet mortals saw not the Aja, saw their cities and temples as it were sinking in the ground, but they saw not. It was the Aja falling and condensing. See that? Similar to how the Sphinx looked. Verse 18. Jehovah said, Would I give that growth to corpor, inspires man to corpor. Would I give that growth to east, the spirit, inspires man to spirit. And in the days of Aja, neither angels or men can enthuse mortals with spiritual things. Only they that are organically grown in spirit can withstand. So here it's saying that if you're not well equipped, you will fall during the time of Aja. And here is another description of mortals during the time of Aja. Book of Divinity, chapter 15, verse 10, where it states, verse 10, When Aja cometh upon the earth, the drudges, spirits of darkness, come also, The days of darkness of the earth are their delight. Their harvest is the rich falling Ajah. It suiteth their laziness, and their inclination to bask about. They become in those days like an overfed animal, and to their masters, their false gods, they become worthless, for they derive their existence without labor. Ajah is their delight, but they are also like foolish men drinking wine with delight, who continue till his delight turneth to madness. So the drudges, spirits of darkness, feast and disobey their master, and then they become boisterous and unruly, full of disorder and evil intent, defying, believing themselves to be gods and goddesses, like a beggar with a pocket full of money, who lack discipline and determined to glut his passion to the full. So is it with drudges in the time of Ajah. See that? So here is giving you a description of mortals and angels' behavior during the time of Ajah, so you can get an understanding of these subcycles within the arc cycle of 3,000 years and the changes that mortals and angels go through during these time periods. And with that, I'd like to say peace and blessings. Shalom.